Hi you guys, welcome back to another episode here on Feather Nest Studios, where art and magic combine to create beautiful, beautiful miniatures. So today's video, I'm really excited. I'm going to be building something that isn't walls and trim. What? I know, right? Finally making something else. So today I wanted to explore a little bit more of the kitchen, and last week's video we built the kitchen. So if you have not seen that, go ahead and check that out. And that's just part one because I mean the kitchen has so many things in it. So I'm gonna try and keep them organized at least a little bit according to rooms and I guess things that we're making. But today we are gonna be making the beautiful, beautiful stone stove that we see in so many different episodes where Hilda is usually attached to it. But I was curious on how I was going to make this, and I played around with a lot of different ideas, but I'm really happy because this is what I have created. And so I'm going to be taking you guys deep into the process of how I made this, and I'm basically just using all everyday materials. It's foam board, we have tacky glue, wood glue, mat board, paint, and a little bit of paper clay. So all in all, you should be able to make this if you just have those materials, and those are materials that I would say are a good like staple material to have in your toolbox when it comes to miniatures, because the things you can do. Without any further ado, let's get crafting. So to begin this project, I'm going to be cutting out a piece of foam board, which is basically going to be the back brace to my stove. Foam board is extremely easy to work with, so I highly recommend using it for all sorts of projects. But I just made sure that it fit into place, and then I was ready to just mark out exactly where I wanted the stove at. Even though these marks aren't going to be seen, it just gives me an idea of what else I need to build and work with. And so in order to get the actual bottom piece of the stove, I'm cutting out the same square over and over again. And I ended up making, I believe, 5 pieces. I had to make another one on top of these guys just because it wasn't quite the depth that I wanted. So again, you kind of have to play around with the space that you have and what you want inside of it. And then I take some regular tacky glue. You can use tacky glue. I think I'm actually using Elmer's Glue for this. And I'm just using that to glue the pieces together. Now, with any kind of foam board, you do get some warping, and I do have some warping on my back brace. So if I could go back, I probably would have made my back brace a double thick foam. What am I saying? I would make my back brace a double thick foam board, but instead it still works. I'm just gonna have to use some major clamps to get it to fit into place. And now for the front piece, I'm cutting out just a little section that's going to be for my stove. Now I decided not to make this one an opening stove. Okay guys, I'm trying. I don't know why, but I'm really tongue twisted right now. But instead of making it actually functioning, I decided just to make it, for show, because it is going to be kind of hard to reach in my project, and I don't want everything to be functional. But again, that's up to you. If you wanted it to open and close, I would just cut out that middle section to all your foam pieces and put some kind of hinge on there, maybe a magnet to keep it shut, and then you could have a functioning little stove. And now to get my front facing pieces, I'm going to be cutting them out of foam board once again. Foam board is a really great skeleton, but it's not always great to work with when it comes to painting, though it can be done. I have done it and will do it. And now I'm just cutting out more pieces of foam board to basically prop the facing piece onto the back brace. But in order to get the actual texture, I'm going to be using mat board. So my first step is to cut out and trace out all my front facing pieces out of mat board. Then I'm also doing the sides because I basically I'm going to cut it and score it like you can see right here. That makes the mat board bendable, and that allows me to kind of have one piece for every front facing piece instead of having to cut out multiple pieces. As you guys will see here is that mat board is extremely easy to work with. I mean, it's not the most stable, and that's why we're using the foam board. And then For the inside of the piece, to hide basically that this is just a brace, I'm going to be using some chipboard from, I think this was like a frozen food box. Again, you can use cereal, any type of cardboard, thin cardboard that's easy to cut and work with. And I'm just tracing out a very long piece because I need these two glued together in order to be long enough to fit inside the internal piece. And I'm also cutting out the back piece that you will see above the stove. And now that I have all my front facing pieces of mat board, it's time to make my design. And so how I normally do this, and I do go into this in detail in other videos, so go ahead and check out that video in the right hand corner if you want to see this in detail. But basically I'm drawing out some bricks, and then I'm going to be cutting the very first layer of the mat board in order to create depth and dimension. This process is one of my favorites, honestly, because it's so simple, but yet it creates so much in your piece. It really does add those little details of realism. And so basically I just do a single line, and then on the line, and then right below it I do another line. And then that allows me to lift up the paper and take off that very first layer of paper. And I repeat this process throughout all my front facing pieces, both going across and going down. And this, again, it is a little tedious, but if you pop on one of your favorite movies and you just chill and you really like the process of making miniatures, then this will be fun. I have so many people tell me that they can't do miniatures because they don't have the patience. And I just think that's interesting because for me, the whole purpose of it is to sit down and really, enjoy what I'm doing. My whole life is very busy and on the move. And when I'm just sitting down and watching TV and making something, I feel really connected to my spirit. And I don't know, for me, the patience is the reward in the process. So once I have that glued on my front facing piece, I'm now gluing on the chipboard that's basically going to hide the fact that this is not a real stone stove. And I put that aside and let that dry as I finish doing the rest of the pieces. And so once I have all of that done, I go ahead and glue on the back piece, and then I start working on the stove little handle face, I guess. I don't even know what it would be called, your stove door. And I just, honestly, with this one, I definitely winged it. I took little bits of scraps that I found around me, and I just started gluing them on. And I had to actually go through several different designs before I was happy with the outcome. I will say that, this probably isn't the best way, and it does make my project look a little bit quirky, I guess, but I don't mind that. I honestly don't mind that my project has a little bit of quirk to it versus very strict detailed realism, though I do like realism the most, and I do want to keep it for the most part realistic, but I don't mind if it doesn't look perfect. There's going to be little details in there that maybe no one else notices, but I do. There's gonna be things that bother me that no one else notices, and maybe other things that people wish I did a little bit more proper and to the T, but for me, it makes me happy. And I also remind myself that this is a dollhouse, right? It's not the actual set as much as I wish it was. So it's not going to look exactly like it does in the show, and that's okay. And so after I cover it with Modpodge, we are now ready to paint. So the painting process is by far my favorite process out of all of them. I like the texturing, but I just love painting because that's when it really, really comes to life. And so like usual, I start with a really dark paint. That's just to really coat everything and get it all ready to put in those fine details. I don't worry too much about the details on the brace as much, the back brace, because most of that's going to be covered. But I do want to make sure that any of that white does not peek through once I glue it. So once I have it all covered in a base gray paint, it's time to add the fine lines in between the little bricks. And for this one, I decided to go with a lighter gray. Normally I do a darker gray, but sometimes with bricks, the concrete between them is lighter, and it looks like in the video that I saw on the actual show that the brick is light, the concrete between it is lighter than the brick. So I go ahead and do that, and then I start to paint the door to the oven, and I paint that all black, and then I added some silver, just little bits there, here and there, to give it kind of a silver rusted look. And then I pick out random bricks and I paint them black, I paint them a light white, and I also paint them a brown color. And for this, I didn't have any actual patterns that I was following. I was just kind of having fun with it and picking out which ones looked right to me. And so, of course, for your project, if you want to do it every so often, it's really up to you how detailed and how patterned you want it to be. But this is just me having fun, and I really, really loved this part of the project. And something I saw in the show was that there was a rim of bricks around the center part. And so I really sat with it, and I decided to use some paper clay to make those bricks instead of just cutting them out of mat board, because I figured that that would be a little hard to get it to wrap around with the mat board, and I didn't have a lot of space to work with, as you can see on the sides of the stove. So instead I got some paper clay and I smushed it down with my hand, and then I took a knife to cut it so that it was a little bit more precise. And also, you don't want to use too much paper clay in this because when you do, it just gets hard to work with. I'm still really new at clay, so I don't know if it's just me, but it really took me a process to get this right. So I go ahead and put glue down because I'm not really sure how well the paper clay can stick to mat board that's been painted over, or the chipboard that I'm gluing right now. So it helps just to have some glue so you can make sure that in a few years this part of your project doesn't just fall off, because that would be a nightmare. So then once you have the amount of paper clay that you want to use, just use your finger to kind of work it and mush it down and to get it even with the rest of it. Now, something I've learned that really helps is to have water nearby. This really helps with paper clay, removing the cracks that gets in them, because paper clay does dry out. And so to minimize the cracks, the water really helps. And then I'm just using a ballpoint tool. I think that it's used for like putting glitter down or sequins down. I'm not really sure, but it's really, really useful when it comes to random crafting. And the first tries that I did this, as you can see, I'm trying to just scrape away the middle part. And I actually do like that look a lot, but it was kind of a nightmare getting it to really work with me, because what it was doing was pulling up more of the clay than I wanted. And so sometimes it would, turn out nice, and this like little bit is not so bad, but as you can see on the sides, it flares up part of it, and when that dries, it becomes kind of like a sore for your eye, so it took me a little bit to really figure out a system that worked for me to get it looking nice, but also not a super big pain. So a better system I found was, instead of using the ballpoint to use the rest of the metal piece to create the indentions, I just kind of repeated that process over and over again. I did have to go in and add a little bit of clay in between them, because as you can see, it literally was pushing it down to the mat board, which it made it way easier, but I did have to kind of mess with it afterward to make sure it all looked cohesive. But this is what I'm allowing to dry over the next 24 hours, so then we can paint it and have this beautiful stone stove. And what's so funny is I'd always hear miniaturists talking about how you put in so much work and then the video makes it look like it took you 5 seconds. And that is so true. There's so much time in between of, hours of actually doing the cutting, the painting, and really waiting on things to dry. So making this channel has definitely given me more respect for all the miniaturists I've watched. And this is my first dollhouse from scratch, and I've never made stuff like this before. So a lot of these pieces are a brand new journey for me. And I just love this community. I really do. So if you're someone who's into miniatures, definitely let me know below what you do and what kind of projects you're working on, because I think that's what makes it so much better. So the last thing the stove needs is some burners. And so I'm just using a simple red paper clip that I end up painting black, but I like that it had red because it makes it look like it's kind of hot. These definitely came out a little quirky, but I'm probably going to end up putting pots over them, so I wasn't too worried about it. But it definitely, they were not perfect. It takes a lot of patience to get these things as perfect as possible. But once they were painted, we were ready to go. So here's our final project. Thank you guys so much for coming today. Please make sure to hit that subscribe button and to like this video if you would like to see more videos like this. I'm always so excited to have more of you join me on these miniature adventures. Oh, that could be like a thing. Miniature adventure. Maybe. Next week we are going to be diving into more furniture because I wanted to make things that just weren't walls and trims, but we do have walls and trims next week as well because, you know, we're still building the first layer of the house, so naturally we have to have walls for that. But I'm also be making some little umbrellas and a little desk, a little radio to spice it up a little bit. So make sure you guys come back next week for that. And until then, happy crafting!